Okay, hi everybody. We're going to finish up psychological research today. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we have a quiz due every Friday before class. The only Friday you're not going to have something due is April 16th. So just remember, every week you've got to finish and submit a quiz on Brightspace. Okay.
Professor, I will be right back, okay?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. And everybody should be on video if you want to get full credit for participation today.
Professor, did you get my email this morning?
No, who is this speaking?
Sammy. It's Sammy.
Oh, Sammy. Okay. No, I didn't. Is there like a reason you can't be on video?
Yeah, my mom stepped on my laptop, so the camera's not working.
Okay.
The audio
That's
is.
all right. Okay, and then I think Alexander has crappy, his internet's choppy, but everyone else hopefully can be on. Is that what the issue is, Alexander?
I'm not gonna lie, I'm on my phone and I just had to swipe up on a notification like to get rid of it, and it kind of just took off my camera for a sec.
Oh, okay. So hopefully, hopefully you'll stay on camera most of the time. All right, great. Okay, so what else did I want to say? The first exam is 2 weeks from Monday. Just so you guys can, be aware of that and start preparing. It's going to be on everything we covered these first 2 weeks, which is the psychological foundations and psychological research. And then in the couple weeks before the exam, we'll be covering biopsych and sensation and perception. So all of that will be on the exam. The exam will be 25 multiple choice. I'm not going to make it very long because I want all the students and the students with time and a half accommodations to be able to take the test during class, during our synchronous class. So students without accommodations will have 33 minutes to take the test, and then you can just leave class. I'll just set it up so the exam stops in 33 minutes. And then the people who have time and a half accommodations will have 50 minutes to take the exam. And then it'll just stop. Okay, and in my experience, most people take less than 25 minutes to take the exam. So I don't think 33 minutes is going to be a hardship for anyone. And I will have a study guide posted by February 15th. That's like a week before the exam. And it usually covers, like, in a general way, what you'll be asked about. It doesn't have like questions that you'll be sampled from, stuff like that. It tells you what information to focus on. Okay. Okay. Oh, and I wanted to say the questions that were most often missed on the quiz that was due today, there was one where the answer was publication bias. So that was kind of hard because I didn't call what I was talking about publication bias, but hopefully you got that from the textbook. But publication bias is what I was talking about when I was saying that it's really hard to get published unless you get significant results in your article. So because of that, the outcome influences the decision, whether it gets published or distributed. So that was the correct answer for the question. I think some people may have known what publication bias is, but not known that that's the name for it, right? But I'd say like still 83% of the class was able to get it right. And then, and there was another one that I had the wrong answer marked as right when the first like 7 people took the quiz by like Wednesday night, and I fixed that. And I went back and made sure those people got credit for that correct answer. Okay. I forgot what it was. Something about the nervous system. the sympathetic nervous system question. Anyway, and somebody had gotten it right the first time and then said, oh, I guess I was wrong. And I gave that person credit. All right. Oh, and then the other one was, if a researcher wants to understand if eating more bananas causes increased irritability, what type of study should they perform? And what was the answer for that? What's the key word in there? I might be able to hold it up so you can see it. Oh, is it backwards? Yeah. If a researcher wants to understand if eating more bananas causes increased irritability, what type of study should they perform? What's the big hint there? What word?
Understand.
He wants to understand.
That's part of it. But what tells us that it can't be a correlational study? Causes, yeah. Because correlation does not imply causation. One cannot imply causality from correlation. And we didn't get to that last time. We're doing that today, but hopefully you'll get that. You would have gotten that from the textbook. So just because two things go up and down together doesn't mean you know which one is causing the other, right? Maybe, if you wanted to know if eating bananas caused irritability and you did a correlational study, you wouldn't know for sure if it was that when people were irritable, they decided to eat more bananas, right? You don't know which one made them both go up, right? It could be that when they eat bananas, they feel more irritable, and it could be that they decide to eat bananas because they're irritable, and it could be like some third variable that accounts for both. When people are hungry, they're irritable and they eat more. And a lot of people have bananas in their house. So maybe hungry, contributes to hangry and eating bananas, right? So that's called a spurious correlation, when there's like a third variable accounting for a seeming causal relation between two other variables. So does anybody remember there's an example that the textbook gave that they say is like the most common example that's given all the time for that? For a correlation that really doesn't make causal sense. And then there's a third thing that really explains it.
Sleep and like the amount of sleep you get or something like that. Is it that
Which one? No, I mean, that's not the one I'm thinking of. It could be in there, but. It has to do with the weather. Does anybody remember? And eating something. So there's this correlation between people eating ice cream and more aggressive behavior. So as the amount of ice cream the population eats goes up, so too, the temperature in that same area rises. So not the temperature, of course, that goes up, but the amount of aggressive behavior, right? So does eating ice cream cause people to hurt each other? No, in fact, probably the opposite. So the third variable that's responsible for aggressive behavior in ice cream eating to go up together is a hot temperature, because people are more aggressive when it's hot outside, because people go outside and they're in groups. And sometimes when people are hot, they're irritable. Maybe people drink more when they're outside in groups in the heat, drink more alcohol, right? So the heat accounts for eating more ice cream and being more aggressive and getting in more fights. But if you were only looking at ice cream and aggressiveness and getting in fights, you could mistakenly assume that one of them causes the other. Like you get in a fight and you're like, oh no, I need ice cream now. Or you eat ice cream and then it causes you to be angry for some reason. When to me, it has the opposite effect. I'm far less angry after I eat ice cream. Anybody else notice that? Yeah, so that's a spurious correlation, and it's why you can't say that one of the variables is causing the other just because they're correlated. See what I'm saying? So correlate, so the thing you need to remember, and you can impress all your professors with this if you remember it, is correlation does not imply causation. And last, in fall term, I had like a funny Facebook post that was, well, I thought it was funny. I don't know if you guys would, but it was like a jack-o'-lantern, you know, Halloween decoration that was supposed to look scary. But the carving was in the pumpkin wasn't like a scary face. It said inferring causation from correlation. Like, you know, and and the person who posted it was an economy professor, economics professor. So it's equally scary to them. Anybody who cares about math, that and like using it to apply to a population thinks that's a bad idea. Okay, so I want to share screen and talk more about oh, I have to open system preferences to allow Zoom to share my screen. I finally got my iMac. Oh, okay. Sorry. Oh, okay. I can't record unless I quit now. After I changed that, I can share screen. So I have to quit and have you guys all rejoin me, okay? Sorry.
Professor, but you're recording right now.
Huh? Oh, it says I'm recording. So let
Yeah.
me try later. Hopefully it's gonna record. Hopefully it'll still record when I share screen. We'll have to make sure. Okay. Yeah, it's still recording. Is it?
Yes, you're still recording.
Okay. Woo, all right. You guys disappeared, but I think I can fix that. Yeah. All right. Love my huge new monitor. Okay. And you guys just see the PowerPoint, right? You don't see a whole bunch of other stuff.
No, we just see the PowerPoint.
Okay, great. All right, so we saw this one already. So this is pretty much what I just said. Causation does not prove cause and effect, right? Some other factor, oh, and that's called a confounding variable, could be causing the systematic movement in our variables of interest. So remember, a variable, that's just anything you're interested in that changes. That's why we call it a variable, you know, otherwise it'd be a constant. It'd be something that stays the same all the time. So a variable is something that can change, right? Sometimes it's not like sex, you know, but it's something that you observe differences in because you're interested in them. Okay. And then a confounding one, you know, you've heard of the of the famous scientists who yell confounded, you know, because they're upset because they've confounded their scientific experiments. That's when, you know, air gets into a vacuum or something like that happens. And you can do that by mistake in your psychological studies too. So if there's a confounding variable, it's like if you think you've randomly assigned people from your study into the group that gets your treatment or doesn't get your treatment, and then you realize there's a huge difference between those two groups. So it's not random, right? That's a confounding variable. All right, so now we'll talk about, you know, the gold standard, the one we can rarely use, unfortunately, in psychology, which is experimental design. So in experimental design, I mean, it says it involves two groups. That's basic design. Sometimes you have multiple groups. But for simplicity, we'll say you have an experimental group and the control group. The control group is the one that doesn't get something of interest applied to it. Like if you did an experiment to figure out if bananas cause irritability, you'd have an experimental group and a control group. And what would you do with the group, with the experimental group? If you wanted to see if bananas cause irritability, what would you do with the experimental group?
You would give them the like kind of like the if like we're using the bananas, like you would give them like actual bananas.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I was just looking for bananas. You didn't have to, you didn't have to define. It's usually like the condition. You call it like the condition, or if you're a behaviorist, you call it the stimulus. So, you know, whatever it is that you're applying to people to see if it affects them, you know. It's also called that thing is the independent variable. It's the thing you can change. It's called an independent variable. So the experimental group would get the bananas, and what would happen to the control group?
They wouldn't get anything.
Yeah, they don't get anything. So you just compare them over a period of time and then have, you know, interview them or have them do a survey on irritability, or have their closest friend rate them on irritability, or maybe put them in a situation like that's kind of a naturalistic type observation, but might pull for irritability, and videotape them and see who seems more irritable in that situation. So you're more likely, you know, there's all different types of ways of measuring it, right? But what if you failed to randomly sample from the population and you had way more people with food allergies in your experimental group? What does that mean? What's a word you could use to what's happened to your experiment?
There's gonna be a bias.
There's a bias. It's been confounded, right? Now you have this third variable, right? You've got food allergies in there. You didn't randomly assign people in a way that there's not a systematic difference between their experimental group and their control group. So you don't know if it's the bananas. It might be, you know, the symptoms of a food allergy. Some people are allergic to bananas. It's tragic, I know, but it's true. You know, when you do an elimination diet to see if you have food allergies, that's not one of the first things you add. You know, you add things people don't tend to be allergic to at first. All right, so random samples ensure that you're representing the population you're studying, right? Like if I wanted to represent the whole United States population, should I just sample you guys? Yeah, what would be some problems with sampling just Psych 101 students if I wanted to represent all of the US? Psych 101 students at Assumption. What would be
Well,
some
we're all
issues?
in like a certain age, and I'm assuming you want more people, like a variety of different ages.
Right, so there's one big thing. You know, you wouldn't be representative of all the ages in the United States, right? Even if you were only interested in adults, there's, you know, you guys are at the beginning of the adult spectrum. You lucky fools. And then what else? What are some other difference between Assumption Psych 101 students and the rest of the United States?
We all have similar interests.
I didn't hear that.
Oh, sorry. We all have similar interests.
Yeah, there's things that you have in common that other, you know, that the rest of the population doesn't, right? Like access to education, apparently, right? Do you think more of you are Catholic than overall in the United States? Let's see. more of you probably finished, I mean, more, all of you finished high school. And that's not, somehow you did. I don't care if it's a GED or whatever. And that is more than in the overall population in the United States, right? This is kind of exciting, but this is a slightly more diverse 101 class than I usually get. And I don't really know because I'm only judging on appearance, but usually there's like a massively white sea of faces that I see in Psych 101. So there's clearly some subpopulations that are underrepresented in our classes, right? Can you think of, a racial group that you see rarely on campus and in your Psych 101 classes? I mean, in this class, that there are people of that race or ethnic group here?
Spanish.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there's some Hispanic people here, but it's not proportional to the proportion of Latinx people in the US population. Same thing with the Asian American population. There's huge, my sister-in-law used to run the English language program in Worcester for the public schools. And yeah, by no means does Assumption represent, the Worcester City ethnic and racial breakdown, right? So there's a whole bunch of reasons why our 101 class wouldn't be representative of the US population. When I did my dissertation, I had to find at-risk parents and their babies. And then I had to find parents and babies who were not at risk and make sure the racial breakdown was the same in the non-at-risk group, because I wasn't trying to compare races. I was trying to compare people who had the same kind of underprivileged, lack of finances, less than one adult in the household with, more than 2 kids under 3, stuff like that, that puts people at risk. Of course, there's a disproportionate amount of people in minority groups in that situation, but it's not because being a minority makes that happen. It's because certain oppressive situations in our country make that happen, right? So I wasn't like trying to compare white people with Black people. I was trying to compare people whose kids were doing okay in spite of these situations with people whose kids had been identified by their pediatricians as at risk in these same situations. So, okay. Yeah, so you're trying to prevent any alternative explanation than the one that you're trying to prove in your study. So if there's some obvious alternative explanation, your study's not good. This master's thesis, one of my mentors wanted me to do, was comparing like a new kind of design of a school to a regular public school. And it was like looking at outcomes. And the school, one big factor in the school was that all the parents who went there had to spend at least a day, preferably 2 days, full time in that school setting, in the model school. So like, even if you took those same kids, those parents who were sending their kids to the model school and put them in public school, how do you think they'd compare to the average kids in the public school setting? Would they look like all the other kids? No, why? How would they look and why? They look better or worse? If they had parents who wanted them to go to a school where the parents all had to spend at least 1 day the full day in that school with their grade school kids? How are those families going to be different? Could all of your parents have done that? And why? Why couldn't your parents have necessarily spent a day or two at your grade school? What do
I,
they?
oh,
Uh-huh.
oh, can I go? Okay. I was gonna say that like most parents have jobs and don't have jobs that allow them to take that much time off.
Right. Okay, so there's going to be a huge difference in economic status, right? They're either like independently wealthy, or one of them has a job that can support the whole family, or, you know, they have huge flexibility in their schedule, and that means they have way less stress in their lives, right? And say your parent didn't have to work full time. How many of you think that parent would have spent a full day in your grade school? Would that be what they would have chosen to do with that free day? Say a parent had suddenly gotten like one day out of work, still paid. Would they have spent that day at your grade school? Anybody think they would? Grace and Kaylee? Your parents would?
No, I was just gonna answer your question. I wasn't raising my hand that my parents.
Oh, okay, just say whatever you want to say.
Oh, I was just gonna say that like most parents, I mean parents that got just one random day off would spend it like doing work around the house probably, or catching up on things that they're behind on.
Right, yeah. And Kaylee, what were you gonna share?
Oh, I was just saying that, I mean, whenever I was little, my mom did spend time like in classrooms whenever she needed help, so that's why I raised my hand.
You did get time with your mom was in your classroom? Is that what you said? Okay,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I mean, I'm pretty into it, and I didn't spend a lot of time in the classroom with my kids. So, you know, when they wanted me to do this master's, I was kind of like, I can tell you now that the model school is going to look better, right? These are parents who have time and money, who care that much about their kids' education that they're going to blow off whatever else, you know, and you know they have other stuff they need to do. And maybe even they would take that time to earn more money if they didn't have a lot of money. And they're taking that time to go to the school. So you know that that's like their first priority. So parents who are going to make that their first priority are going to be kind of heavily involved in their kids' schooling. And at least in grade school, that helps. Later on, it probably backfires. You know, I think you can really mess with your kids' development and success if you're too like all up in their grill when they're in junior high and high school. But, you know, so I feel like there was a difference between those two groups other than the independent variable being tested. So that's a big problem. That's a big confound. If you had compared those two groups on, you know, what their biggest priorities in life were, what their income was, how much free time they had, how much daily life stress they had, there'd be huge differences, right? So that's a problem. All right. This kind of jumps, but it's an important part of an experiment, is an operational definition. You know, so we keep saying things like eating bananas makes people irritable, being in this special school makes people have better outcomes, you know, this medication makes people less depressed, things like that. But you have to really operationally define everything, every variable that you're looking at in a study. So when you say eating bananas, well, how many bananas? Like if you're making people eat 25 bananas, yeah, they're going to get irritable. Has nothing to do with the banana. You know, I mean, it has to do with that there's 25 of them. You know, if you're having them eat 2 bananas, yeah, maybe that would make more sense. And it has to be standardized. You know, like if you have your, you know, your little results and you publish them, And, that's what happened with your population, great, but it means nothing unless other people would get the same results, right? Because the whole point is, if you want people to be less irritable, tell them to stay away from bananas. But if no other population would ever have that same experience, who cares about your study? It's not going to change other people's experiences with irritability, right? And so if you want to standardize your study so other people can do it and show that it's generalizable across all people of this age or whatever, then you have to define your variables clearly enough that other people can do it. Also, how are you measuring irritability, right? I saw a study that looked at using NSAIDs in grade school kids. So NSAIDs are like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So like Advil, Aleve, Motrin, those drugs, and over the counter. And it was like they gave kids Advil like before recess or something, and then had them self-report on how much empathy they felt with somebody who pretended to hurt themselves out in the playground or something like that. I'm like remembering the study off the top of my head. And yeah, the kids who had like an Advil or something were slightly more empathic towards the kid who hurt themselves, right? But the difference, and it like came out as statistically significant because there were like a ton of kids in the study, which makes it easier, even if there's a small difference, to get like what's called a statistically significant result. But is it practically significant? Because I look at it and it's like on a scale of 1 to 5, how empathic they were feeling. It was like the difference between a 3 and a 3.2. So I'm like, who cares if somebody's a 3.2 on how empathic they're feeling versus a 3 on a scale of 1 to 5, right? Are you going to notice that on the playground? Like, whoa, Jimmy's usually around a 3 on empathicness, and today it's more like a 3.2. What's going on with him? What a sweetie. No, you're not going to even notice. So the study, I thought, was kind of meaningless because you couldn't apply it to anything, right? And once the first year like common reading was this book called Nudge, and the argument was that like you should have people do things that will benefit them. That should be the default. Like the default retirement plan shouldn't be nothing. It should be this match that like works out the best for people over the first 10 years of their jobs or whatever. Just set it up that way, and then they can change it if they want to, instead of setting it up the least lucrative way for the employee, stuff like that. And they said, if you change the size of a dinner plate, somebody will lose like from 14 inches to 12 inches or something like that in diameter. Someone will lose 2% of their body weight over the course of a year. And I'm like, okay, so 2%. So if you weighed, 100 pounds, that'd be 2 pounds over the course of a year. If you weighed 200 pounds, that'd be 4 pounds over the course of a year. And I'm like, is that practically significant? Like if you weigh 200 pounds, do you feel like I'm a new person? If you lost 4 pounds, like who cares, right? So you can have a statistically significant result that really doesn't mean anything. That's another really important part of a study. But the first thing you need to do is make sure that your study is replicable, meaning it can be repeated and will get the same results. That's why you have an operational definition. There are things that are really hard to operationally define, right? Jealousy, empathy in a toddler. And that's what I did for my dissertation. anything having to do with Freudian theory, anything that's supposed to be unconscious, how are you going to operationally define that? And the idea is to make it so clear that people know exactly what they're measuring, and that other people who don't know each other will come up with the same number or the same, unit if they're measuring the same thing you were. Okay. All right. Oops. Okay, so I said which one was the independent variable. It's the one you change to see if it influences something else. And the way I remember this is there's two types of variables, dependent and independent. And the dependent variable is the one that you think depends on the other variable, right? So it's a very easy way to remember which one is which. The dependent variable is the outcome variable that you think is dependent upon the independent variable. And the independent one is the one you can move around. That's why it's kind of independent, because you can switch it around, right? So, if it was the banana and irritability one, well, we can move around how many bananas somebody has and see if the level of irritability depends on that. So irritability is the dependent variable and the bananas are the independent variable. And a lot of people have been studying weather like forever, but now it's more like video games instead of TV. But people have been looking at whether watching violence on screens of some kind causes violent behavior for decades, right? So the dependent variable is the violent behavior. And the independent variable is watching screens. It's kind of hard to operationally define those things, isn't it? And it's hard to randomly assign people to groups who watch violence on screens and groups who don't, right? Because do you know a bunch of people who play like Call of Duty? Do you guys all know somebody? And we'll agree that's dangerous, right? I mean, dangerous, violent. Do y'all agree Call of Duty is violent? Just nod, man. Wake up. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So do they have things in common besides that they play Call of Duty? Do you think? Do you notice other things about the people who play Call of Duty? Not that I'm saying you can profile, like, oh, you're wearing camo. I know for sure.
Or like just in general?
Huh?
Like the people we know who play Call of Duty, or just in general people who play Call of
People
Duty?
do they have other stuff in common?
I feel like most of them play sports, so like they have like that competitive nature.
Okay, so maybe like some kind of activation to like win, or I don't know. I don't want to sound like I'm knocking people who are athletic, like to dominate or something. I don't know. But say they have some other things in common. It's going to be really hard to match people who do play Call of Duty with a group of people who don't, right? Like on everything, like how athletic they are, IQ, sex, race, make sure they're matching groups and there's no overall big difference between them, because otherwise you won't know if the reason one group is more violent from the other is because of Call of Duty or because of all those other things, right? What if it's because they have the type of parents who bought them Call of Duty when they were 18 months old, or like bought them a, AK-17 when they were 5, on the black market or something, who knows? I hope I'm not offending anyone. I always run the risk. Okay. But I have to come up with these examples quick, All right, so it's really hard to prevent bias in experiments. And one way they do it is with double-blind studies. And that's when the experimenter doesn't know which participants are getting the experimental condition or the control condition. So the easiest example is if you're testing a medication. the person handing the person the medication should not know whether they're handing them the actual treatment, like the actual Prozac or whatever, or the sugar pill, because if they do, they might unknowingly say like, okay, here's your Prozac, and like, okay, here's your sugar pill, and like, you don't even know if you're doing that. There's tons of studies showing that people affect the outcomes of studies unknowingly. They're not trying to be, they're not trying to be sneaky. It's just people, people don't have poker faces, and they sometimes change things without meaning to. So a double-blind study is where nobody knows which thing the person's getting, right? Like, so some third party like puts, a label on the medication that's red and the placebo that's blue, and nobody involved in the study knows whether the red or blue is the real medication, right? And then it gets, split and divided between the two groups, and nobody knows which is which. And people might develop hypotheses, but they don't know for sure. So they can't really bias the results. And I remember I think I told you, my mentor in my postdoc would hire research assistants and not allow them to know like which participants were which were the at risk, who had been in a treatment program, which were not at risk, which hadn't been in the treatment program, stuff like that. Because she wanted people who could run statistics, who weren't going to try to massage them into place. Because statistics sound so like official, oh, it's numbers, it's math, it must be the truth. But people mess with that a lot. You can make your statistics kind of show what you want them to show if you're not a highly ethical person. So as a psych researcher, you have to get good at being able to detect that in reading a study, right? Oops. Wait. Yeah. Oh, I did it again. Okay, so I talked a little bit about operational definitions and making sure your study and your measures are replicable. That's what reliability is. When you try to get a study published, you have to prove that the measures that you've used in your study are reliable. Meaning, if I studied irritability and I used my own little scale of whether people are irritable or not, I'd have to show that other people rating people on irritability using my measure would come up with the same result. That other people would say, oh yeah, that person's irritated at the same way I would. Otherwise, my measure's useless, right? Right? I mean, do you have a friend who like sets you up with people and you're like, no, you're not a good measure. I don't trust your judgment. That means you guys don't have a good inter-rater reliability, right? If you think they're like not a good matchmaker, that means that you don't have good inter-rater reliability for who's like a good potential suitor for you or good potential match for you. Right? So you want to have a measure that makes it like totally standardized, that everyone would agree, yeah, this person's irritable. And of course, some people are easier to rate than others, but you want your measure to be really good at rating that trait or that behavior. And that's what validity is. Validity is when when the design of a measure works to measure exactly what it's designed to measure, right? Is it accurate? Like how many of you think like, what is the SAT designed to measure? What's it supposed to say about you guys? Grace?
Like it kind of measures how like you can comprehend material, and I guess like I don't want to say like it measures how smart you are, but like how much like maybe knowledge you have on certain subjects in the SAT.
Yeah, I mean, so the difference between an achievement and an aptitude test is an achievement test is supposed to show like what you've learned. Did you learn the content you were supposed to learn by the end of high school, like MCAS? Don't get me started and then on MCAS. And then the the SAT or the GRE are supposed to measure like, what are you capable of learning? You know, of course, you know, I think it used to stand for Scholastic Aptitude Test. And I think I don't know if they've changed it because there's definitely an achievement, you know, part of it. So but you know, people use it, admissions counselors use, you know, decision makers use it to determine who's going to do well in college, like who has the capacity to do well in college. So how many of you think, raise your hand if you think the SAT is a good measure of who can perform well in college? Okay, that's like no one. All right. Yeah, so we kind of, okay, raise your hand if you don't think it's a good measure of who's going to do well, because some of you might just be like, I'm not voting. Okay. Yeah, so none of you think it's a good measure. So that means none of you think it's valid. You guys all think the SAT is invalid. It's not an accurate measure of what it's supposed to measure. That's what validity is. Let's see how much I didn't. I think I actually did talk about this statistical significance. Well, not this part. Okay. Because we have 2 minutes, so I got to decide what part of this I'm gonna talk about. I talked about this slide. I didn't talk about these two. I think that this one's more of a Psych 101 thing. All of the statistics in psychology assume that all variables kind of have this nice normal distribution, like this nice bell curve, where there's a score most people tend to cluster around. Like if this is the number of people over here that get this score, you know, and then there's going to be way fewer people who get a much higher score and way fewer people who get a much lower score. And that's called a normal distribution. And that's a measure of variation. And so the mean or the average would be right here, right? Right where most people land, right? That's what an average is. But sometimes you can see that, although this is basically fits in a normal distribution, the data are varying here. And statistics are supposed to enable you to analyze how much they're varying from that. All right, so I am going to stop there. And I will see you guys on Monday. So have a great weekend.
You too, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.